Welcome to Beyond the Business Card podcast.
And then the first big race was the Marathon des Sables in the Sahara. So it's 250 kilometers across the Sahara Desert, carry everything on your back. You're running with an ultra light pack, but the only thing they give you for 7 days is water.
Today's guest is Tom Otton, founder and CEO of Create, a digital communications agency that's made its mark in the region. Beyond business, Tom is also an endurance athlete who's taken on challenges most of us can only imagine. And he's a TEDx speaker who shared his insights and experiences in some of the world's most inspiring stages. From growing a successful agency to running ultra marathons, Tom's journey is all about resilience, big ideas, and pushing limits. And I must say, we recorded this episode just before Stagwell acquired Create, so the timing is perfect. And Tom did not even give a hint in the podcast as to what the exciting journey was around the corner. But this was a great episode, and I hope you enjoy it.
You have to be independent when you're relatively young and you're in a different continent from your family, and you've got to figure out things for yourself. And I think that's exactly what we need to do with business, right? You're solving a lot of problems every day, and I think that upbringing I'm very grateful for, because it set me on the path to where I am now.
Hi guys, welcome back to Beyond the Business Card podcast. It's me, Justin McGuire, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Tom Otton. Tom is the founder and CEO of Create. Create are a very successful media, digital and advertising group based here in the UAE, serving a GCC market.
Mostly, yes.
Mostly a GCC market, but 175 staff. It's a real success story for the region, and I'm delighted to have Tom here today. Tom, I'd love to start this story by just understanding from you, how did it all begin? Tell us where things started.
Mate, well, look, firstly, thank you very much for the invite. It's great to be here. Hopefully we can add some value to your listeners and take a few things away from the story. Look, it's a big question. I don't know where to start with that, really. I suppose if we dial into the company itself, it started with the global financial crisis in Dubai. I lost my job in 2010. And I had an opportunity, I had a few people contact me to offer me roles, and I knew both of them personally. And I said to them, well, look, I can do that job. It doesn't need to be full time. How about you just contract me and we'll drop the value of that. And I hired one person and just made sure that the first client paid me before I had to pay the one person that I had hired off Dubizzle. Actually, that's where I found my first team member. And that's literally how it started. I was doing marketing consulting and built it organically, brick by brick, from then until now. And that's been almost 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. Now, I know from just talking off camera that your journey before starting the agency is quite interesting and colourful. So can we just take a rewind button and go back a bit?
Yeah, sure.
And just, because there's a slight Welsh accent there as well, and a bit of a South African one. So just understand sort of a bit more about your origin story, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah. I mean, look, I say I'm Welsh, originally from Wales, but the reality is I grew up in a number of countries. I was very fortunate to bounce around a lot. I was an expat kid because of my dad's job. Spent quite a few years down in Oman. So the family were there for about 12 years, 13 years. So I went to school there, but the latter few years of that, I was back in boarding school in the UK. And that was interesting. If I look back on it now, that was pre-internet, right? So I used to get a letter from my mum in boarding school once a week, and I used to have a bag of pound coins. And I used to phone the family from the UK to Oman to have conversations, and every few weeks I'd see them. But that was interesting. And I think when I look back on it now, it was definitely foundational to kind of how I think, how I'm built, how I'm wired. You have to be independent when you're relatively young and you're in a different continent from your family, and you've got to figure out things for yourself. And I think that's exactly what we need to do with business, right? You're solving a lot of problems every day, and I think that upbringing I'm very grateful for, because it set me on the path to where I am now.
Gotcha. So I was also in boarding school for a bit as a kid, actually, pre-internet days.
Yeah.
And I know now that sack of pound coins that you just said to call Oman, that would not have lasted very long.
It didn't last very long. No, it wouldn't have, right? But there was no other choice. It's like 30 minutes on the phone. And that was about it. And look, in fairness, my mum especially used to travel backwards and forwards a fair amount, so I wasn't like left on my own, and it wasn't child abuse. But I used to enjoy it, honestly. I mean, but you basically you're a young kid living with your mates.
Yeah.
In boarding school, just having a great time. So I look back on it very fondly. But definitely it played a role. And also having the opportunity to grow up in Oman, I feel a really strong affinity to the region. I ended up finishing school in Wales, and I went to South Africa for university, which was just an incredible experience. What a beautiful country, beautiful people.
What made you choose South Africa to go to university?
It's just with my parents. They made the decision in terms of where the family was moving. I've got two younger sisters, so they were going into school. And we were at that kind of age where I was going to go into university. They were going to go into the next stage of school. And my dad was a pilot, and he was flying based out of Amsterdam with ex-South African Airways pilots. And we'd been in the UK as a family for a few years. And as an expat, there's only so many winters you can get through before thinking, no, this isn't for us. So we were looking around, or my parents were looking around at that time, really. And they said, well, look, the economy's, is where it is in South Africa. So, it makes sense financially if you move there with the family and, earning money from Europe. We went to visit. Schools looked good. University looked good. So we pressed the button and we moved over there as a family, and it was just an incredible life experience being there. And I moved straight from there to here. So as I finished university, I got my first job here. And the reason I took that is because a friend had already moved across. I was kind of coming out of university. You're like, I could go left, I could go right. You don't really know where you want to go, but there was something in the Middle East that was calling me back. And I had that that fondness from being in Oman. And I was like, what? It was a good place. I'm going to go and see. And at that age, you can do whatever you want, right? I'll give it 6 months. I'll give it 12 months. And I'll leave if I choose to. I've been here 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just fascinating, because a lot of people have, as we were speaking out off camera, a lot of people have decided to call the Middle East their home post COVID.
Yeah.
But I moved to Dubai in 2008, which was a very interesting time, to be honest with you. But
absolutely.
Everyone thought I was mad when I said I was going to Dubai.
It was like tumbleweed down Sheikh Zayed in 2008. I remember it.
Yeah.
It was actually a little bit later because it felt like the crisis took a little bit longer to get to Dubai, right?
Well, it definitely did, because I actually got offered the job in the August, landed in the September. I think everything crashed around the October, November. So I saw 3-4 weeks of what things were like pre-crash.
Yeah. And then it was like a handbrake, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember there was cars in my building with the checkbooks and credit cards on the car seat. I mean, we're talking like Aston Martins. So people, people just, they were pulling thousands of cars out from the airport car park because people were just driving to the airport and getting on a plane.
I was in first place I lived in was JLT.
Okay.
So that's Jumeirah Lake Towers for anyone who's not in Dubai. And basically, the car park barriers hadn't been put in. So I was in Saba Tower 2, I think it was.
Yeah.
And I thought I had the wealthiest neighbours going. And little did I know that those cars didn't leave for 2-3 months. It was a dumping zone. Very strange time to move into Dubai.
Yeah, it was wild. But, Dubai, as it always does, it bounced back stronger. And every time it seems to go through any sort of crisis, it comes through and just manages to position itself in such an incredible way.
Yeah.
That's why we're all here.
But so... Well, the great thing is that you had this affinity with the Middle East, and that's why you chose. You didn't, you could have gone to the UK, you could have gone to London. Probably most people thought, this man's going to go to London, but you decided to come to the Middle East. What were you doing? What was the first job that you landed?
So I came in and I was working. I was working for Fitness First, actually.
Okay.
Actually, there was a couple of roles prior to that, but the first proper role, it was just kind of doing stuff to earn some money to start with. I was just kind of hustling, but then I was running the marketing across the Middle East for Fitness First, which I definitely wasn't qualified for. Which I don't know how I got that job. I think it's just because on my CV there was some sports stuff and there was some business stuff, and they were like, cool. So yeah, I ended up I was there for a few years. I was looking after 16 or 18 clubs across 4 or 5 countries, and yeah, that was I was definitely not qualified. But anyway, I learned on the job. It went well, and that was a job that I then lost a bit later on. Yeah, and then started Create, which was basically replicating a marketing department to start with.
Got you. And
then just kind of went from there.
So you say it very casually how you sort of went from losing your job into setting up an agency, and of course, for most people, that's not an easy decision to make. Yeah, and I'm sure at the time there was a lot more thought that went into it.
Yeah, there's a bit of a story around it as well, actually. So I I had a side business going on that was doing retail radio. So I was looking after, so I'll backtrack a little bit before Fitness First. I'd already set up a business that was, you'll know this from the UK, like you go into a store, you got like ads playing and they've, set playlists, all stores around the country are all the same. So I set up, the first retail radio business here in the UAE. And at one point we had about 160 locations across the region. We were doing all of Spinneys, we were doing all of, Troitrums at the time. We were doing all of Majid Al Futtaim stores. So I was doing that for a few years leading up to like my first kind of career role. And the reason I moved across is because the kind of business went on autopilot. I'd hired 2 people. So I don't even need to be part of this. It was kind of just running. So I was like, okay, left them to it, and thought I can go back into the corporate world, and ended up getting in the Fitness First job. So again, so fast forward, I lose that Fitness First job because of the crisis. I still had the music business to fall back on. So that was there. But I knew that that's not what I wanted to do. It's just, but fortunately it gave me the finances to, as a bit of a stopgap to think, okay, what next? And I was stood in the business center in Dubai Media City when I got a call from a recruitment agent.
Not me, by the way. Not me.
No, it wasn't you. It was a competitor. And I remember speaking to him, and he said, look, we've got this job for you, because I'd put my CV out anyway. And it was at Red Bull, and I can't even remember the role. It was like so relatively sort of mid to senior role at Red Bull, mid-level. And I stood there and I was quiet, and I was thinking. He was like, and he literally said, are you still there? I was like, yeah, I'm still here. And I thought to myself, I was like, fuck it. I was like, I'm not gonna go forward for the interview. Like I'm gonna try and roll the dice. So I've got this idea. So like I'm out of the market. I'll come back to you if it doesn't work out. And that was setting up Create, because I knew there was the start. There was the opportunity was starting to show. I was like, I think there's something I can do here. If I speak to this person, I do this, I know what they want, and I speak to this person. So right, I can bring this together, and I can probably create some sort of consultancy role for myself to start with. I know who I need to hire first. Let's just see if I can roll the dice on this thing. And that was, I could go and point out the square meter where I was stood in that business center right now, which is actually just about 600 meters from here.
Yes.
And that's where it started. Literally stood in that on that carpet, and I was like, right, this is it. And I put that phone down, and I was like, this is it. Let's start.
What have you got to lose?
Well, yeah. And at that point, nothing. And I had a little bit of a safety net from the other business, but that was it. And it started there. And as I said, I hired the first person, off to Bizzle, went to speak to two people that had contacted me about roles that I didn't really want, certainly not full time, but as clients, I was like, okay, I can make this work. I know what they need, and I can get some revenue for the business from there. So, and that's how it all started, and just organically then built brick by brick.
Gotcha. Do you think if the financial crisis hadn't been there, do you think you'd have set up your business? Would you always want to be an entrepreneur?
Yes. So for sure. Yes. And I had done that with the music business. I at the time, financially, I was like, well, it doesn't make sense to just sit on this when I know that in the corporate market, I can earn some more money. So I like to think that I would have gone back to that and just done something else, maybe set this agency up, maybe not, maybe done something else. I'm not sure. But who knows? I've thought about that a few times though. And I think trying that can be circumstance, but 15 years later, that's not circumstance. That would have, I believe that would have been a decision at some point along the line anyway, right?
Yeah.
I don't believe that I'm here just because of that one moment.
Yeah, to be honest, I feel exactly the same. The financial crisis forced me into, well, didn't force me, but made me think about setting the business probably a lot sooner than I anticipated I would open a business. But I had 10 years of work experience. I thought, what have I got to lose? I can probably go back to a job if it doesn't work out. Yeah. I didn't have wife, kids, or anything like that then. So I just thought, right, let's go for it. Yeah. So just press the fast forward button for me. Sounds like the same for you as well.
And that's it. They say luck is preparedness meeting opportunity, right? Yeah. So it's, you kind of make your own luck by being prepared for the opportunity that shows itself. You wouldn't have been able to potentially take that opportunity if you hadn't had that work experience, you didn't have that mindset, you weren't already thinking that way, so you had prepared yourself for it.
Correct.
And I think that's a lot of life is that. If you've set your mindset up in the right way, you set your life up in the right way, that when these opportunities show themselves, they become things that you can actually act upon. Otherwise, they just pass you by, you forget them that they even happened and it didn't happen. But if you're prepared for whatever direction you want to take and you've worked towards that, the opportunity shows itself, you act on that, and all of a sudden you were lucky.
Correct. You've also struck me as someone that doesn't really like being in a comfort zone. Through obviously as the business has grown and the way you challenge yourself there, but also what you do outside of work. Where does that come from though? From your early life,
with the endurance side of things?
Well, no. Where does taking it? Obviously
taking the risk,
the risk taking, the putting yourself out your comfort zone. It's obviously there at an early age, and I'm just trying to work out when did this start?
I think I would go back to schooling again and having to. We were laughing off camera a minute ago about the amount of accents that I had growing up because of going to different schools in different countries and trying to fit in at that point. But I think there's also a comfort level with change because of being an expat kid. That it definitely has kind of rubbed off for me, and it's part of like find out foundationally how I see life and how I think, that I'm used to change all the time because I was bouncing around schools. We moved countries a lot, and I'm very grateful for all of that. But whilst that was unsettling, I think as a kid, it just my baseline of just dealing with chaos and change ends up, my tolerance level to that, it becomes quite high. So then within a business, I'm always looking for what is the next opportunity? Where can we go? Let's not even the concept of like resting on our laurels or just kind of spinning the wheels because we got to a place. It doesn't enter my psyche whatsoever. Which is also, it's a positive when you're trying to build a business, but it's a negative when you're sometimes just trying to relax. Yeah, because you can't unplug because you're just like, okay, well, this thing, and I read this thing, and I could do this thing, and you're just constantly wired to move forward. And it's something that I've been talking to a friend about quite a lot recently. And it's like, well, at some point, you have to realize that what got you to this point is not going to get you to the next point. And we're all trying to solve for happiness, essentially, right? You're just doing it in different ways from an early stage, and you look to do it in different ways from a later stage. But the challenge then becomes is like, how do you try and switch that off? And I had a 2-hour breakfast this morning with somebody. And this was mostly the topic of conversation. He's a very successful guy, doing some incredible things. And it was the same thing. I was like, mate, last time we spoke, you were looking to kind of like, dial things back a little bit, enjoy a bit of time here and experience that. I was like, and now you have 4 job titles. It's like, what are you doing? He's like, I know, but I'm trying to do the thing, and I saw this opportunity, and I keep absorbing all the energy around me. And then, and then I think as entrepreneurs, we're wired to build, we're wired to solve problems, and we're wired to see opportunities and try and act on them. But yeah, trying to figure out where the line is sometimes
very hard. Yeah,
very
hard.
Hard.
Yeah. Balance. Balance. The forever battle. I mean, it sounds like you as well.
Yeah.
So, but let's go back to the early days. So you've started the agency. You've hired someone off Dubizzle. But for people that don't know what Dubizzle is, by the way, Dubizzle is where I buy my car. Where you get second-hand cars. It's a classified site.
Craigslist type thing.
Yeah. What made you choose that as a?
So honestly, just a lack of really knowing where else to go.
Yeah.
Did I put a job ad up, or did I see someone? I can't remember. I might have put a job ad up on Dubizzle. And I was looking for a designer of a certain type. And this was super early days now. I mean, digital, it was in its infancy, especially in this market. And I knew that I needed a designer, and that was it.
You got to get scrappy, right?
Yeah. And if anyone's listening from agency land, I think it's important to know as well. I mean, I had never worked with an agency, and I'd never stepped foot in an agency. I had zero understanding about how an agency operated when I started Create. I was essentially just recreating a marketing department from a corporate marketing team that I knew because I was running one of those. But
why did you not think of getting into an agency before opening an agency?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And if someone asked me for advice, I would say go and work in an agency and figure it out, understand it, and then go and set an agency up. It would have been a lot easier. But I think that's why it's taken so long to get to where we are.
Right.
Because if I look at the trajectory of other agencies, of people that actually understand agencies, that come as, I don't know, director of blah, 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 and they move across and set their own agency up, they could do in 2 to 3 years what it took me, honestly, 7 to 8 years to do, because I was just figuring the business out. And I was keeping it relatively low key. I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, was a bit of a lifestyle business when I was younger as well. Like, I was trying to grow stuff, but I was also enjoying life. And then I got a little bit more serious with the business. and really started to dial into, okay, where do we fit in this market? And the things that you need to do if you're going to find a gap and grow. But earlier on, it was very kind of generic marketing type work. And it was only when I pivoted it purely into the digital space that we actually started to see some traction. And it took me some time to get there, and the market needed to move in that direction because it was almost non-existent when we started it then in terms of the digital space. So I was kind of, as I said, generic, moved into digital, and then found our niche and started to scale. But as I then started to hire people, I mean, I didn't even understand what they were saying, like terminology. I didn't understand the terminology of an agency. So they would say stuff to me. I'd be like, I've got no idea what are you even referring to? Even how to price something. I'd never priced anything as an agency. And I had like staff members being like, no, you need to put like a line item for account management on top of the work. You can't just sell the work. We need to like have an account manager. Like I knew nothing. And it was interesting. And I think that definitely slowed growth in the business, in the early years. But what it did help me with is I had no preconceived ideas of how to do things. So I made it up as I went. And I just thought, well, I listened to the client. What does the client need? That sounds logical. Let's do that. And I really think that's made a huge difference in the business because we do operate differently. We really lean into the client relationships. We really listen to what the client's looking for. And I know many agencies will say this, but like, there's always a preconceived idea of like, it needs to be done in this way. And for me, it was, we just figured it out brick by brick. So it was very different in the early days. And we've got a little bit more normalized as an agency of our size. You have to have certain systems and processes, but early days you don't. And we used to get continual feedback, like, you guys operate very differently. Like, you're not trying to charge us for everything. Like, we were really leaning into long-term relationships. So yeah, it was a while.
That's very interesting. There's a few things I want to unpack from that. That's all right. So
sure.
First of all, opening up an agency without agency experience, you would have learned very quickly that being a jack of all trades as an early stage founder, sort of being the financier, particularly cash collection here is
tough.
A challenge in itself, but also being the front guy, being the boss, being the new business person. I mean, how did you do all those things? A lot of those just seem like they're very new skills that you were having to learn on the feet. How did you do that?
Honestly, business is just dealing with people, right? And the skill set of like let's say design or that, I was hiring that in, right? But everything else, it's dealing with people. What do you need? How can I help you get that? Like, let's work on this together. I don't understand this thing. Can you explain it to me? And vice versa. And it was basic, but that's how we started. And obviously, Googling stuff and learning and reading all the books. And so I'm increasing my knowledge base, compounding month on month as I was trying to scale this thing. But a lot of it was just that. And then finance. If I was to give advice to anybody about building a business, it's outsource finance as soon as possible to someone that knows what they're doing.
Great.
And I didn't do that. It took me too long to do that and really realize that. I was, you're always trying to minimize those internal costs as much as possible. And sometimes you lose sight of the fact that but you're actually shooting yourself in the foot because it means you can't then go and do A, B, C, and D. And especially if you're the front man in sales, that has a direct impact. So there's this inverse relationship between control and growth. And in the early stage, I was controlling far too much, and therefore it slowed growth. When I started to listen to other people, bring other skill sets in, still obviously oversee everything, but started to relax a little bit on controlling everything. That was, that was a seismic shift in the trajectory of the business.
Gotcha. Yeah. The other thing I want to touch on is now I've in my role as running a recruitment business out here, I've just met with multiple owners. Sure. I've seen multiple agencies scale, shrink, disappear, new players come in. I mean, you name it, right?
Of course.
I've seen a lot of people, not a lot of people I've met have scaled to 100 plus business. That's a fact. Secondly, most people I meet are lifestyle agency owners, right? Okay. So they want to have I can see they've got like a max 20, 30 person agency business. Yeah. The founder has a hell of a life, and the churn rate of staff underneath that is quite heavy. What made you that? Because there's not many people that start with a lifestyle, get used to the riches of having a lifestyle business.
There's no riches in the small.
Well, maybe that's it.
It's just time.
Right. Yeah. Because many people I know who build a lifestyle business, they tend to stay in that area.
Sure.
What made you change that and go, you know what, let's go for it. Want something here, let's go for it.
I think I started to just see the opportunity that was in front of me from the market was moving in our direction from a digital standpoint. I knew that as an entrepreneur, you're wired to do more, and you're wired to see how far you can go. I'm very curious, and in all areas of my life, whether it be the endurance side of things or in business, I want to see what's possible, and that's how I was wired from an early stage. Where when I say the lifestyle side of things, it was somewhat influenced by the fact that I just couldn't really figure out how to grow it and differentiate, because the market that I ended up going into wasn't there yet. So it was like kind of generic marketing. We kind of tried to niche into kind of health and wellness brands, and there was a bit of that, but it was going somewhere, but it was fine. It was just ticking over, and I was like, okay, this is kind of where I'm at for a while, and I understood that, but I was always curious to like, okay, but where can it go? And when I found where it could go, which was into the digital space, I was like, right, this is an opportunity. I can see this growing. I can see what's going on in the rest of the world. We're always generally, back then, less so now, we're always generally 2 years behind the rest of the world in our field. So I was like, okay, I can see this. I can see where it's going. I can see that this market's going to change. Let's start really focusing on this. And then it started to work. And I was like, oh shit, this is working. And let's build. And then it was just like a rocket ship, and you lose sight of everything else. You just build. And that's all of a sudden 5-6 years have gone past, and you've moved the thing forward. So
there's something else that you said, which whenever people ask me, how do you grow a business in the Middle East, or whenever I offer someone advice, it's always about giving value. Don't look at it as don't look at the region as if you can earn a fast buck, but actually come into the market and see how you can do something for someone, and try and put the finances to one side. Because if people can see that you're prepared to invest time into them, you get it back, right? Now, you've mentioned that. You just mentioned that, and I think you got that from your early days of growing up here. I'm going to imagine. What was that? Is that true? Tell me.
Very much so. I think there's a couple of points there. Firstly, it's the culture of the region, is relationships. It's not transactional, and you see that in the culture that's all around us, whether it be Emirati or general Arab culture. It's how business is done here, and certainly from the earlier years, right? That's So firstly, there's that. Secondly, I wasn't looking to leave. This is my home. I'd moved here. If it wasn't going well, I would have looked somewhere else, sure. But it wasn't that I hadn't come here for X number of years to then go somewhere else. I was like, well, I'd grown up in Oman. I want to live here. I've got a good life here that I'm slowly building. So I didn't have this transactional mindset. And the third point to that is that there's a huge opportunity. It certainly was. Look, there's more longevity now, but certainly back then, so many people, the vast majority of people were coming in, doing what they could and leaving. And you saw that in friendships, very transactional friendships. People wouldn't always make so much effort because they knew that they were probably going to leave next year and probably not see those people anymore. And that's changed over the 20 years that I've been here. But in business, I specifically saw that early as an opportunity to be like, there's so many people in here just trying to make cash and just trying to extract. And it's very obvious. And to my point previously about, we'd leave money on the table. We wouldn't try and charge for everything, which then they were like, why are you guys behaving like this when these guys, even though we're paying them more, are trying to squeeze 1,000 dirhams here and there and overcharge for this? And I was just like, it doesn't make sense, does it? And over time, we would then build these relationships and a lot of our clients are very long-term relationships, because that's still the ethos of the business. If we need to leave money on the table for the relationship, we will. That comes back to you next year or even the year after, or you get recommended to someone else. However, but consistently building that network because you get known for doing business in a certain way, that's how we've built this. So I think that's changing now because people are here for the long term. People are bringing their families, so that's great. I was always hoping that the market would change in that way. It's obviously less as almost like I suppose competitive advantage as it used to be, but it's how business should be done. It's how people should behave. So I'm all good with that.
Good. And in the early days, obviously you've got this a very successful business now, but it wasn't always like that. And sure, when we start in the early days, I mean, I know there's some particularly the volatility of the region from 2010 to say up until COVID, really, there was a couple of, we got whacked in, for example, in 2016. For whatever reason, 2016 was my bogey year in business.
Okay.
And that was because of the knock-on effect from the oil price crash.
Yep.
And what happened was, rather than all our job orders go off at once, the businesses that we were working with, mostly agencies, their contracts were being renewed. They were getting less money. People were leaving. And it was like, it felt like we were slowly unwinding for a bit because people, you may recall this, the population was going down all of a sudden.
I remember,
So when you work in recruitment, that's not what you want to be reading, right?
Of course,
so we flatlined here for a while. And that was really tough because I had 45 people in Dubai at the time. And I didn't realize most of our clients were really some of them heavily connected to government clients. And of course, when they stopped, we got knocked by that. Tell me a bit about your, I suppose, the struggles that you had in the early days, because resilience is something that, every entrepreneur I meet has got it in abundance.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, you have to, right? Because you deal with a lot of challenges and you deal with a lot of things that you just do not see coming because you just can't control all the variables and be across everything. I mean, look, there's multiple stories over the journey. I mean, I suppose the most acute one is probably when I was building the music business, which was prior to the corporate role. So early days of being here. And that was literally going backwards from even the money that I had in university. And at one point I was sharing a room with a friend who I'd convinced to leave his engineering job in Abu Dhabi to set this business up with me. I had no money to do it. And I was maxing out a credit card that a bank gave me by mistake because they thought I worked for some other corporate, because the name of my company was quite similar to the name of that. And when he said, "Do you work for this company?" I was like, yep, sure, whatever. So I got a credit card and then was literally living on that. And the two of us were sharing a room and literally eating shawarmas for dinner every night. Couldn't spend more than 20 dirhams on a meal. And that went on for a little while. It was just like that was the early stages. That's kind of where it got to. And I remember closing the laptop one day and just being like, I'm done. Like I'm going to buy a ticket out of here. Like I've rolled the dice on Dubai. I've literally got to the bottom of the barrel. I've sold things that I've literally done everything to kind of keep afloat, to keep surviving. And that music business got off the ground because a friend of a friend invited me to drinks. Bear in mind, I couldn't afford drinks.
So many stories go start like this.
Yeah, I couldn't afford drink. I was like, shit. I was literally sitting around in my boxer shorts all day trying to send emails to people to get them to even to have a meeting with me. There was nothing. There was zero revenue. And I had one smart outfit. So I was like, I put that on. I went to drinks and it was at the Madanat, actually. Do you remember, was it Trader Vic's?
Yes.
Yeah, Trader Vic's down there. Yeah. So
Tika Pikas, I remember those.
Yeah. It's dangerous, right? So I'd go in early and I'd buy the first round of drinks on my credit card, which would be 3 or 4 beers. Then that was it. Because then as people would come in, other rounds would be, and then I'd be out after an hour or so because I couldn't play that game anymore. And I met someone there who was running IKEA, actually. And he said to me, he was like, and I had met him once before, and he's like, "You do this music thing, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." Someone's actually asked me about it. And anyway, long story short, we ended up putting all the music into IKEA, setting up retail radio, all of their announcements, everything, managing all of that, which was actually a pivot in the business, because what we were aiming at was going into shopping malls and selling airspace to tenants. That's what I was trying to do.
Oh, wow.
Unsuccessfully. And when he said, "Can you do this?" I was like, "Yeah, I can do that." We pivoted the whole business on that conversation, and that our first check came from IKEA. And then he was like, "I'll introduce you to the rest of the Majid Al Futtaim brands," and we ended up doing Ace and Marks and Spencers and all of them. That's where it started. But literally, I was had, when I say no money, the most broke I've ever been in my life, including when I was at university, was that 12 months leading up to getting that first contract across the line.
Wow.
So so really a proper,
And again, it just goes to show the amount of times that I've got, I don't want to go to this thing. I don't want to go to this networking event. I don't want, and then you go, and all of a sudden, and this is especially in Dubai, right? Yeah. You're always you meet a couple of people, and that can change everything.
If I hadn't gone to those drinks, I wouldn't be in Dubai, wouldn't have built Create, wouldn't have met my wife, wouldn't now have a child with her. It's wild, a sliding doors moment. That one person, that one moment. That's it. You just got to keep. And the lesson from that for me is just you just got to keep showing up. And that's something I carry into, even if I really don't want to go to stuff. To your point, 7 times out of 10, I'll drive home thinking I'm really glad I went.
Yeah.
Because you never know.
Yeah. But I don't like all networking. I have to say.
No, for sure. I mean, I don't. No, you have to be selective, especially as your time.
I'm getting very selective.
Right?
Ones where I get a name tag when I walk in, I'm always a little bit nervous.
But in the early days, you've got to do everything.
Yeah, agree.
In the early days, I mean, I was part of the BNI network, so getting up early mornings and meeting with those guys. I was doing everything that I could to try and build the network. And as you know, in your business, well, network is everything. And it's just by doing that, it allowed me to get to the point where you can start to be a bit more selective with your time. Obviously, you have to be. But in the early days, you've got to do everything.
So things have started to take off at Create. You're growing a business. You've never grown an agency before. Now, I know this from growing a business myself, and I think what I did in the early days was, and I set up a recruitment business only having 2 years recruitment agency experience. But all my experience before that was in communications agencies. Okay. So I basically set up an almost replica version of the company I'd left, because that's all I knew.
Yeah, that's what you know, right? Yeah,
and of course. With that, the foundations a couple of times weren't as firm as I thought they would be. Did you get any help when you started to grow, Create? And you obviously have to get management layers in. You have to build pillars within the agency. If you've never worked in an agency, how on earth did you know how to do that?
Again, so yes, but much later, and that's really helped us with our scaling. But for the first 10 years, no. Again, it was just figuring out, asking what clients, what they needed, listening, and then acting accordingly. I brought in growth consultants in 2021, late 2020. Actually, it was late 2020. We got through that 6-month wobble of, is our business going to fail?
Yeah,
and then I started to see the first kind of bits of opportunity showing through from post-COVID digital world. We're a digital agency. Oh wow, okay, this is starting to go nuts. So I was just getting into that space. I thought I had a good business. I did not have a good business. But you don't see the things that you can't see, right? And that goes back to I was sat at home and I was like, I'm making the XYZ decision, whatever it might have been, and I was like, I'm making this decision essentially sat in a dark room, and this decision has been made hundreds of thousands of times, and there is a way of doing this that is correct, and there are many ways that are incorrect, and I'm sat here and I don't know the difference between left or right. So I was like, I need to create a structure around me to help with my blind spots, because I knew, especially that the first 10 years in the trajectory was relatively slow. I'd got it up to 50 people, so it's still it's a nice little business. 50 people. I was figuring it out. That was okay. I had my hands around that. But as I knew it started to scale, I was like, every day of school day, I was like, now you get through that stage, as you well know, with your 45-person business, every system starts to creak. And you're like, okay, now I'm about to have to change my entire HR system or my entire finance system, or reorganize how traffic and communication moves through my agency. That I had no idea about how to do, because that's very specific, right? You can really get that wrong. And I was trying to figure out those big strategic decisions of like, to get to the next level, I don't quite know where to start, which red flag to deal with first. So I brought these guys in called Waypoint. They're based in the UK. They're all ex-agency people, and they focus specifically in this industry, and they help agencies like mine grow. So they'll run different programs, whether it's, okay, let's build your sales pipeline, let's help with the operations. They've got different people that have got different skill sets. And I've worked with them since then. Yeah, still working with them today. It changes year on year, kind of what I want them to kind of focus on and how they help me. But yeah, they've been really helpful. So I would say once you get to the point where you can afford that, they're probably going to show you things that you are not seeing that are of far more value than whatever you're paying them. And that definitely played out in the first few months.
I bet. That's one of the things. I mean, entrepreneurship, it's actually very lonely, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so.
And you spend most of the time thinking about, God, thinking most problems that you're the only person that's ever encountered this. Then all of a sudden, I had this hallelujah moment where I went, hang on a minute, I'm reading about all these successful businesses. Yeah. Why don't I just call up someone that's done what I've done before, or that's sold their business, or been much more successful than me, and ask them how they did it?
Yeah, so that's it, right?
It's like a light bulb moment.
And trying to figure everything out on our own.
Yeah.
Makes no sense.
Yeah. So it really changed things for me. And I think I did it actually just before COVID, which was interesting time because obviously the mentor I had never experienced anything like COVID, so we were both going through that,
just figuring it
for the
out,
first time. But it was just nice to have someone to talk to.
Yeah, that's it.
If anything.
Yeah.
So that's made a big difference to your business, is it? Because I know of the 175 people you've got now, they're not all just in the UAE, are they? Would you mind just giving us a rundown?
Yeah, sure. So the business has grown from the UAE hub, and we now have offices in Riyadh, and we have an office in Cairo, and we've got team members based in both. We've got a lot of team embedded into our Saudi clients as well, and then we've got team members. We've got a few team members that are working for us remotely around the world, depending on a specific skill set. So that's generally how it works. And just to color it in, what we do as an agency, we're a strategic digital communications agency that's focused on government, semi-government accounts. We're very much fueled by content. So we've got a full production house within the agency that's able to do global TVC work for the likes of Emirates. We've done a lot of Dubai Tourism's work over the last 4 or 5 years. We're quite skewed into the kind of the culture and tourism space, not exclusively, but some of our biggest clients are in that space. So we've built out certainly a deep understanding of that sector. In terms of the general services, what we're doing, it's content production, so video content, social media management, big ticket items. It would be like a public investment fund or Visit Dubai, those types of clients, and then through into platforms. So for us, social being one, and then the other being what we build. So enterprise level web and app. So for example, in Abu Dhabi, their hero digital asset is Experience Abu Dhabi, and we've been managing that for the last couple of years. So that's like a 30-person account just focused on that piece of software. Essentially, it's a website, but it's everything that they drive to, and that's the work that we're doing. So because of that, we've got very different areas of the business. There's data analytics. There's an AI play at the moment as well, and because of that, we need different skill sets that come from different parts of the world. So we've scaled into Egypt. That's allowed us to scale some incredible talent there. In Riyadh and Saudi in general, it's mostly client servicing with some delivery elements, but a lot of client servicing there. And then we use skill sets from around the world as and when we need them. So that's generally how it works.
What was so working with governments? Obviously, that's for those that don't work in the Middle East. So working with governments, that is the best client to have in this region, I'd say, because
I believe so.
Yeah. What point did you pivot into being a pure play government business? And the other thing I wonder, in doing so, you must have started butting heads with the big boys very quickly, like the big multinational agencies here. Yeah. So it'd be interesting to kind of find when that hallelujah moment was, when you started beating them on a pitch.
Look, it's a double-edged sword, right? So we won the global social remit for Expo 2020, and that was definitely a turning point in our business. We'd been doing a range of different types of digital work, different types of clients and industries, but when we won that, and if you remember, it was really like the city winning the Olympics, right? It was the biggest thing. So because we were positioned there, all of a sudden it just put our name to the kind of the top of the list in sort of government social accounts. And then we started to pick up all sorts with Dubai Holding and Dubai Tourism and many other things. And we built the production, the visibility of our production department off the back of that as well. And then we started to win a lot. So we just started to see that the government clients, they had more for us to do. Their financials were better, more stable, because if things start to go south, government's not going anywhere, but your real estate client might be. So it was just a strategic decision to say, look, let's really start to try and own this space. And that worked, it really worked for us because we had the credibility, and that compounds, right? When you've got 2 government clients, 5, 10, 15, all of a sudden they know, okay, well, if you're working with all of them, then you can work with us. And then also the kind of the secondary effect was the network effect within clients. Our name was getting passed around a lot within the government circles. And then that helped us with our obviously new business, because we were being asked to come and pitch for stuff. So that really helped. And when we started to scale the business, going into COVID, as I said, we had around about sort of 50, 55 people. wobbled a bit, not just in terms of me, but we didn't cut salaries. We didn't let go of anybody when we went through COVID. We're like, right, we're gonna pay for this as a business, which we did for a few months. But fortunately, it then started to pull out of that, and obviously everything then post-COVID moved digital, and then we scaled 100 people in 14 months, and that was a wild journey. That was more lessons learned through that process than pretty much anything else that we've been through.
Imagine a few HR lessons.
Very much so. Yeah,
the
very
big
much
ones.
so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and just operationally as well, like how to do that, like how every system needs to change, and everything became inefficient. And then you're essentially, I mean, you are trying to change the wings of an airplane without crashing it. And that's what we were doing, whilst constantly onboarding new clients, because we were growing and growing and growing. And then in the operations in the background, trying to kind of keep up and, change the plumbing and all of this. So that was, it was a hell of an experience. But it just felt like the company we more than doubled the size, we doubled the revenues in 12 months. It was a wild year. But a lot of lessons learned out of that.
Wild, in many ways, I'm sure. I've also been listening to a few of your other podcasts. So whilst it's interesting, whilst listening to all this is going on, you've gone from scaling, building a business, like doubling the size of your business. You're also an endurance athlete. Now, I used to play a lot of sport. I don't play it so much anymore, but I used to play a lot of sport. And I think
what did you play?
More team sports, football, rugby.
Okay.
The wonky nose being kind of the giveaway.
It's also rugby.
But fitness has always played a big part in my life. So I train in the mornings. I'm not an ultra athlete, if you will, but for me, that's it just keeping fit, keeping my mind aligned, being disciplined. It's allowed me to get through so many situations in work. Now, whilst you were growing your business and doing everything you just said, you've also were doing some incredible endurance competitions. Can you just sort of give me an insight? First of all, for those that don't know you, what it is that you do from an endurance athlete perspective, and secondly, what that brings to your life and why you do it, and how you think that adds to being a boss and running your the business that you've got.
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think it all comes down to mindset, and whether it's doing yoga, whether it's going for a 5K run, or it's training for an ultra marathon, it's all the same thing, because the benefit that you're looking for is emotional stability, and setting your mind for the challenges that you're going to face in front of you. Now, for me, it's a very personal journey, but the way that it's helped me, I started out I played rugby, and got to a point where I was playing for the UAE here, Arabian Gulf before that, and then when they created the federation here, I was playing that. I snapped my knee playing rugby in a tournament in Shanghai, and that was pretty devastating for me, because rugby was my identity. It was my life outside of work. And to be honest, if I actually track it back, probably one of the reasons why the business wasn't going as far as it was, because I was so focused on basically trying to be a non-professional athlete in player in rugby. And that was my life. Coming out of that, I was quite fit. And I definitely wasn't the best rugby player, but I was fit, and I was often, one of the fittest in the team, which led me into running. And I remember sitting down with a friend of mine who's a bit of a mentor as well. And I was talking about, one day I want to do a marathon. He said, there's a marathon in 6 weeks. It's like, just do it. And it went well. I did it, went well. And I was super happy with my time and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, this is cool. It can fit around my business, rather than my business was fitting around my rugby. And you can't move rugby because it's this practice time multiple times a week. You got games on the weekend. So it literally that was my life. And then business and everything else was around it. And then that flipped. And then the business started to scale as part of that, because I was so much more focused on it, because I could go for a run anytime. That led me into the same mindset I mentioned earlier around what's possible, and the curiosity of seeing how far I could go, whether it be business or anything else. Went into running, and then that led me to doing ultra marathons. I did a few marathons. I was like, that was fun. It's like, do I try and go faster, or do I try and go further?
Fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Wow.
But I had this real childhood, this boyish sense of adventure. I was like, well, okay, running along the road's cool, but running through a mountain range is a lot cooler, and that's a lot more fun. And it's really this little boy inside me of just I want to go on a cool adventure. And I enjoyed running as an element of that. And I didn't go into it looking for any sort of mental resilience or mental strength or any of these things. That wasn't why I went into it. I literally went into it because I was like, this is fun and I'm going on an adventure. So the first major race I signed up for was an ultramarathon in Wales. It actually didn't go very well. And it was a huge lesson from that. I was like, if I want to do this, I've got to take it seriously. And also I need to shut up and stop complaining when it gets difficult. So I really took a lot from that experience of mentally how I need to prepare myself for difficult situations. This was the first lesson that I took from running that I took then back into the business. And then the first big race was the Marathon des Sables in the Sahara. So it's 250 kilometers across the Sahara Desert. You carry everything on your back. You're running with an ultra light pack, but the only thing they give you for 7 days is water. And you're carrying everything. So that is an incredible, incredible experience. The running element is what people, 250K, that's wild, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But when you get to that level of fitness, you can run a marathon a day for a few days. And that isn't the thing that's difficult. It's the fact that you sleep in the dirt every night. You don't shower. It's a very hostile environment. It's single digits, if not 0 degrees at night. It's 50 degrees during the day. You're out in the desert. You don't have shelter. It's a wild experience. That level of discomfort, that deep level of discomfort, and becoming comfortable with that and the chaos around you and just finding, okay, singular focus. I have to move forward and I have to finish this race. Everything else is noise. And that clarity of thought that I took from that race, just living, it wasn't even a race. I lived that experience for 7 days. What I took back from that into the business and how I was able to implement that level of thinking of like clarity of goals, clarity of thought, everything else is noise. You know what it's like in your role, right? 10 people are going to come to your office. I've got this problem. I've got this, I've got that. There's only one of those things that's going to bring down the house. And it's probably the person at the back that's not making the noise, that's just kind of said a thing. And you're like, you need as a CEO to be able to navigate that noise and find out what the actual problem is. And it's the same thing with the race. There'll be all sorts of problems going on, but only one thing is going to stop you from running. You need to find out what that is. And that is the thing you need to focus on and ignore everything else. And it's the same lesson as a CEO. And I took that back into scaling a business. And it really helped me because I was able to solve the actual problems and either delegate or ignore the stuff that was being brought to me just because I was available.
Wow. What's the toughest race you've ever done?
Toughest race I've ever done was actually 137 kilometers across the Oman mountain range. It was the first race they'd ever done of that kind through the Hajar Mountains. The Hajar Mountains are like razor blades. So, I mean, even like my hands were cut by the end of it. And it was an incredibly savage course. Like at one point at the 120K mark, I was injured from the start. I knew I was carrying an injury into the race. I was like, let's see how this goes. It didn't get any better. My calf was torn. So it was horrible. But I was like, I'm finishing this thing. It took me 42 hours.
Did you sleep?
No. 40. Well, I say no. I lay down for 8 minutes. Yeah, I literally set my alarm and it was less than 10 minutes. I woke up before my alarm and my alarm was set for 10 minutes. And that was because I was just hallucinating too much. So I was like, right, I need to like reset. The only way to reset, and you can have micro sleeps are incredibly powerful. I woke up from an 8-minute sleep, felt like I'd slept for 6 hours. It's incredible what the body does when it gets to that point of breaking.
Yeah.
So when 120K, get to this checkpoint, and I'd been on my own for hours at this point because there was like over a 50% dropout for the race. It was so long that it was just, and I was obviously quite far back because I was going super slow. So I came into the checkpoint, saw humans, which was great. And then it was a 1.2 kilometer climb, as in like elevation, over a 2.5 to like 3 kilometer distance. So almost vertical. And at one point I was like shimmying around a rock with like both hands on the rock and like shimmying around a path. And there was like a 700-foot drop behind me. And I was like, I'm hallucinating. It's middle of the night, not harnessed into anything. I'm like 30 at that point. I don't know. It was like 35 hours on this course, like completely out of my mind. And I was like, this is really dangerous. But I got through that race, but it was tough. I was awake so from when I actually woke up before starting the race, I was awake for 56 hours.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
You must have been sobbing at the end of it.
I remember my wife was there. I got in the car. And I didn't even get to the end of the first sentence. I was just, poof. My body was shut down. I was fast asleep. So that was one of the most difficult. But there's been loads of different things along the way. One of the most interesting was the Ice Ultra, which I did 2 years ago in February, which was 230 kilometers across the Arctic Circle in February in northern Sweden. So that was down to minus 35 degrees, and you're outside doing an ultramarathon for 230k. That was interesting. That was seriously, I mean, you can imagine, you stop, you start to die.
Wow.
You get, incredibly cold. And everything around you is essentially just trying to kill you because of the temperature. But again, just a wildly enjoyable experience. And just so much learned from it.
So how do you pick these events? What makes you choose to do these events, and where does it
where does it stop?
Yeah.
I know. I asked myself the same question. So for the trajectory I've been on so far, it's had to scare me into training. Like, oh shit, this is serious. If I don't do A, B, C, and D, then I'm not going to be in shape to actually get through this thing, whatever it might be. And that has then been the motivator. So it's something that I can't do now. Like something that if I don't do the thing, I won't be able to even show up to the start line. It's got to scare me into action. And that's been a huge motivator and a help with, I do have to get up at 5 o'clock every day and do this, set run, and I've got to do the thing, and then I've got to go to work. And so that's been part of it. And the other is just like, I wanted to go to like really interesting places that I wouldn't go on holiday to, I wouldn't see otherwise in my life. I want to get to the end of my life thinking I've seen some unbelievable things. I've been to some incredible places, and this is my way of doing it. Not just kind of, let's go on a hike or a trek or a holiday. It's like the running thing is
gotcha.
that takes me there.
So taking this into business now, so you always think about yourself when you talk to another entrepreneur and how they're quite similar you are. So I started my recruitment business here in the Middle East, and I like the first niche kind of specialists doing the Marcoms world. But I felt that there was a limit to how big I can grow the business in the Middle East. So that's why my eyes are vertical. I kept losing out whenever I was looking to relocate talent over here. I was always competing with Hong Kong and Singapore, right? Because I did want to go to America. I think my niche is the East, but those two places, they seem to be, in the early days, I was always losing to them, right? Because people were just going, oh no, Dubai, it's where you go to retire, right?
It was like,
or Saudi.
It was like number 4 on the list.
There you go. There you go. So I then opened up in Hong Kong and Singapore, and also because I wanted to challenge myself and go, right, I want to, I'm not just happy for whatever reason.
See if I can do it again.
Yeah. So I did that. And of course, I've learned a lot of lessons from doing that. Okay. Different time zones, completely different cultures, etc.
Yeah.
But I'm going to push this back to you now. And based on what you've just told me about your ultra marathons and the bit you've grown this fantastic 175 person business in the MENA region. Are you, is there a part of you that wants to take this global? Do you want to push the business further? From what you've told me, you're always about pushing limits now. And I'm wondering how transferable that is into the business.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's a really good question. I believe that there is so much runway in front of us in this market here. If you look at macroeconomics at the moment, like the state of Europe, the state of the US, Asia, I don't know well enough or feel comfortable to move into that space. But if it was to go to one of the other two that I mentioned, just looking at them right now don't attract me. But here in the Middle East, there's so much more that can be done. Saudi obviously just exploding as a market, and a generational opportunity for all of us. You look at D33 plan, we are the UAE, all the national agendas in the region have mapped out what they want to do in the next 10 years, and that's incredibly inspiring. And I look at that as, whether your business, my business, as entrepreneurs, we are, even though feel like we've made some progress, it's still early stage as to where I believe that this market and this region is going to go. And I think there's just so much that can be done here. Now for us, we're specialists in what we do in terms of this government, semi-government, Middle Eastern. So I just think that there's so much opportunity for us to help brands that are coming in here, whether it be, we do a bit outside of the government work, and it'd be maybe like a VW or someone like that. But some of those big brands that are really looking to understand this market, tell stories in this market, that's what we're good at. If I go into London, for example, I'm starting from the bottom. I don't know what I don't know. And whilst there's a bit of a, like maybe an entrepreneurial itch to see what that might look like, I look at the challenges that I have right now, and we're all facing just a constant evolving set of problems and challenges as business owners. You mentioned earlier about going up against the big networks for the work that we do, and I love that. We're in a pitch against billion-dollar companies on a weekly basis. We don't compete with too many of the independents. Some in Saudi, there's a couple of because they've got their niche in Saudi, so there's a couple of independents there. But generally for the work we go against, we're dealing with a Monks or a Publicis or the usual competitive set. I personally get enough from competing with those guys. I love it. I love being the underdog going into those conversations. I love us just having that competitive fight with them, and it's enough for me.
You won't be the underdog going into those conversations.
No.
Probably maybe in your own mind you would be, but actually, I agree with you.
To think, but they've got skill sets that we don't have. We've got skill sets that they don't have. It often depends on the client, depends on the relationships. There's many reasons why sometimes we'll beat them and sometimes they beat us. But it's mostly it's a pretty fair fight, and I think that's it's great to. And I'm also proud of my team, incredibly so, to be able to. We've built from zero. Like nobody knew the brand name, and that comes off their work, right? The incredible work they've been putting out into the market, compounding year on year. So the fact that they can walk into a pitch meeting and go toe to toe against any billion-dollar company and have a really solid chance of winning, certainly being shortlisted and getting down to the final stretch. I think that's. Yeah, I'm very proud of that, and I know that they are.
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, I've seen so many businesses come and go in the region over the years, and really, there's not been many independent businesses that we've worked with from back in the day that are still around, and also my own competitors. My competitors these days, people, my old staff. Actually.
There you go.
And so of that, I'm actually quite proud of the fact I've produced this
outlasting
conveyor belt.
Right?
But I think where I've seen businesses fail in the past, particularly in the agency space, is they've had this foundation client and they've never managed to grow out and beyond that. And when that implodes,
then it goes.
The business goes, right? What's been, one of the key, I think, ingredients that you guys have had that's allowed you, there's probably, we mentioned like a handful of businesses in the 14 years that you've been around that have kind of been around and sold or moved on or scaled, to done anything significant. Why do you think you guys have been able to grow? And could you sort of break that down? If someone's looking to build a business in, what could they take from that?
Absolutely. So, might sound a bit cliche, but I used to read a lot of Richard Branson's books when I started out, because I was like, well, just needing to learn, right? And one of the things that I read in one of his books, which literally became foundational to building the business, was protect the downside. And in order to protect the downside, you need to understand the downside. So you need to look at the business and be like, what could go wrong here? And it always blew my mind that agencies, and I know many of them over the years, would have like 60% of their revenue coming from one client. I'd literally say to them, how can you sleep at night? I don't understand how you go to bed every night employing all of these people and 60% of your revenue is coming from one relationship. I was like, and if that relationship sours, like you've got to let go of all of your staff members. You probably don't even have a company, 2 months later. I couldn't get my head around it. So in building the business, although it sounds strange coming from an entrepreneur, but I am risk adverse. But I mean that in the context of I'm not going to gamble. I'm going to take calculated decisions, and I'll make the decision. I'll roll the dice, but not before I look at what the implications are, what the opportunity cost is, and if it does go south, like what is my real risk here? Taking on board a big client, and that's happened over the years. We've immediately gone all out on finding a second one. And it's not that we've never experienced risk, but I've never been over 30%. Not for one client ever in the business, maybe 35%. Just for that exact fact, just me wanting to be able to sleep at night, knowing that there's stability. And again, I know it's kind of, I think we all have this kind of tension within us, these two areas of our mind, perhaps that I think where that friction creates, maybe some of the magic of where we end up. But because I bounced around so much as a kid, I do look for stability. But I end up building a business that has That is the least stable. Getting a solid job is the stability, right? But or is it actually? So for me, it was like, okay, I'm going to build a business, but I'm going to really focus on protecting the downside at all times. And if that was if someone's listening, like really understand what could go wrong in your business, because, the reason why the 5, 10, 15 people you're probably thinking about over the last 20 years, they didn't do that. And they left themselves exposed. The market moved, COVID happened, whatever it might be. And all of a sudden, the business has gone under, because it's, businesses are very fragile things. So
they are. And for those that don't know, like the Middle East region very well, it's a volatile region.
It is, yeah.
We've seen, a lot of market movement over the years. I mean, just anyone that's had a house in Dubai for a decade will tell you that they've seen
wild fluctuations.
It's just wild. I'm probably I bought a house, right? Can you believe this? 2016, offered on this place, all my money in sterling.
Yeah.
Offered like 3 weeks before the Brexit vote.
Oh, wow.
And I didn't know anyone that was going to vote out.
Yeah.
And of course, that was such a year, that 2016
that was
year.
wild.
Yeah, but obviously the market volatility I saw after that was just insane. But I feel like in the post-COVID world, it feels a lot more stable now. It feels,
for sure,
the volatility, I don't think they're going to be as wild. The swings are going to be as wild as they used to be.
You'd like to hope so. I mean, hopefully some checks and balances on the financial industry help.
Yeah.
I think the UAE, or the region as a whole, is economically becoming more stable. Obviously, the region as a whole has a lot of challenges that we all are very aware of. But if we're talking about the business environment in the UAE, it does feel stable post-COVID. And yeah, I mean, look, things can always go wrong, right? I mean, the reason we survived as an agency, if I'm really blunt about it, the reason we survived as an agency through COVID was literally just because of the finances and just making sure that we had protected the downside, that I wasn't taking money out of the business that I didn't need to be taken out, that we had a war chest and we put the war chest to work. And I think that's also then we reinvested back into the business, which then helped our growth, because everyone was happy, the people weren't losing their jobs at that time. And that reflects through to client relationships. Like, we were just a solid business. And that then reflected through in the relationships that we had and allowed us to scale. And then everyone had to come on this journey of bringing 100 people into our business, which was not easy and not always pretty, but we made it work.
I think now you've had that experience with COVID, you sort of feel like you can go into any situation now and you know what to expect. In many ways, like COVID for me wasn't as bad as 2016 because I'd had that experience.
Yeah,
I wasn't as phased as when we came into COVID.
Interesting. Okay.
I sort of literally, I said to the CFO, right, we know the script here.
Yeah,
this is what we've got to do.
We've been through some
and
it
actually, we got through it because of that. We kept calm. I do recall having slightly fearful. I'd had a couple of drinks and called up my business partner and said, should we just shut 6 months and see what happens? But I had that was my one wobble, and then we went into it, with the shield up and did pretty well.
To be honest with you. And look, going back to your question earlier around the endurance side of stuff and the ultramarathons, that is expanding from personally. That for me is expanding my ability to deal with chaos and difficult situations, because you get yourself into a very difficult situation on an ultramarathon. There's no way of getting through it without it, right? And when you go through that, the physical and mental sides are obviously they're very, very close, and you can train yourself mentally to deal with business by putting yourself through difficult things physically, and going through that process repeatedly over and over again, training and having some really bad days. That builds a resilience in you that then helps play out. And it's the same thing. Like when things go wrong now, I'm like, cool, we'll find a way through, because we always do.
I think age has got something to do with it.
No, absolutely. Yeah, you get more, you've got more scars, right?
Yeah.
So you don't panic so much.
Very true.
And then you're like, we've kind of we've dealt with chaos before. We can deal with chaos again. It might not look pretty, but we'll get through it, and we'll make decisions based on the right intent, and we'll navigate this.
What's life like outside of endurance, sport, and business? And because that's obviously going to play a big part in how you handle situations and keeping you grounded. Just tell us a bit about that.
So honestly, my life outside of, there's not that much left, is there? I mean, family life even revolves around that. My wife trains for Ironman. She hasn't done one in a while. She had a baby, obviously. So the last year, my son turns 1 in about 10 days. Which I can't wait for.
Wow.
So that's been the last year. But honestly, we travel a lot. Quite a bit of that is to do with races and events and stuff. So that that is life. I try and I try and approach, as we're getting a bit older as well, I try and approach life very much from a Stoic philosophy perspective. I think that really helps, especially when things are not always easy and you may be spinning too many plates, you've bitten too much off. Just really understanding what's important and what's not important, what you can control, what you can't control. And I try and take that into business and how we show up. But as you know, it's like, what is business versus life versus sport? It's everything, right? It's all one. Like, I'll be going for a run and sending an email. I'll be, sitting in the office and planning a race. It's just how we spend. It's just everything together. And I like the fact that life doesn't have to be segmented. It's just how you choose to spend your days and your hours and what you're building towards.
I think with me, there's less of the going out with the lads time.
Yeah, it's not much of that.
It's just really not much. I mean, with the 3 kids, like you want to give everyone a piece of it. And I suppose you can only give like my family. Sometimes I've got to be all in on family, depending on what's going on. Sometimes I've got to be all in on business, depending on what situations are. And I'm really just flexing between the two, to be honest with you.
Absolutely.
And then when I've got a little bit of time, I'll try and meet up with the guys. But if they want to go out and get drunk or stuff like that, my age now, that's a 2-day wipeout.
That's a problem. That's a problem. That's absolutely. Look, most of my mates, I mean, my social revolves around the running track, obviously. So we'll go for a run.
There you go.
I did it this morning. We got on a bike and cycled 20-30K, had breakfast, and that's a catch up. But it's you spoke there about balance and imbalance, which is it's something I've looked on for many years, and it's also like, how do you fit so much in and try and push it to the extremes as well? And it's understanding that, like, this there is no point where you are actually balanced. There's this macro balance, but always micro imbalance, right? So this month you're more focused on family for whatever reasons, and you're not going out with your mates, and you're not doing your social, you're not maybe keeping up to date with your fitness as you'd like to. Then another, maybe you sign up to an event and you're going all in on your fitness and business. Okay, you're doing a few hours less per week, and then vice versa with the business. But being comfortable with that, and if you look at it over a year or whatever your time horizon is, that there is balance, because you're achieving everything that you could do with business or with your fitness or with your family and friends. It's at never one point, I believe, that you will be balanced. But if you want to achieve excellence in any of these areas, you have to go all in for a period of time. Now, if you go in for too long, you start to create problems in other areas of your life. But something that's why I cycle through these big races. I'm normally only doing 1, sometimes 2 in a year, but it's normally only 1. And there's a reason for that. It's because it takes so much of me to train, to recover, to eat, to, like, everything's got to be super focused on trying to do as well as I can in such a big event, that it can't be continual, because then other areas of my life would suffer, and they do. And I know it. I'm not seeing mates. I haven't seen some people for a few months because I'm not drinking. I'm training super hard, so many hours in the week, and then that stops. Pick up the phone. Cool, let's go and do the thing. Let's go for dinner. I haven't caught up with with you guys. Family fits in with everything all the time. That's great, but really understanding that you can have these seasons within a year, and quite honestly, if you don't do that, you're going to end up kind of mediocre, right? Because you're not really going all in on anything. So when the opportunity shows itself and you're like, right, okay, an event or a business opportunity, whatever, everything else gets pushed and I go all in on that. And then that's allowed me to do different things to different levels.
That's brilliant advice. And I think we'll end this chat. I could have chatted with you all day.
It's been a real pleasure.
We'll have to save more for the next discussion. Thanks so much for the discussion today, mate.
I really
appreciate it. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. If you want to watch more of the program, too, smash the subscribe button, and I look forward to catching you on the next episode. Thanks a lot.